Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, see. That is a greeting that goes out to our friends wherever they may be listening in. It's one of the beautiful parts of this work. So many of our students are personally acquainted with each other, and those that aren't know this feeling of harmony, of unity that exists between all of us. And there is a specific reason why not only there can be, but why there must continue to be this harmony and this unity between students of the Infinite Way. First place, our relationship with each other is purely voluntary. Nobody is brought in by influence. Nobody is advertised for. Each one comes of their own accord, stays as long as they want, goes if or when they desire. And so we are free. Because we are free, we can love each other. If we were bound to each other by material ties of any nature, those material ties would soon begin to irk. It really doesn't make any difference whether we're bound together by ties of membership or blood or marriage. As long as the tie is a material one, it will irk. The only time that blood relationships and marital relationships do not irk is when the love behind them is so pure and so devoid of material considerations that the relationships do not get in the way. But without that, the material tie will prove to be a noose. Whereas when we are free to have only a spiritual relationship, one based on love, then whatever we are to each other is an outflowing from the heart. Now, this is an important point in our unfoldment because it exemplifies a very deep principle of life, one that must be carried out beyond the borders of our interest in the Infinite Way as a study or way of life. You see, this is a community matter, a national and finally an international matter, that relationships based on free will, on love, can be lasting, can be peaceful, can be mutually beneficial. Whereas those based on any form of material tie must eventually be broken. We speak in these days of peace on earth because peace has been so absent from the scene. And peace on earth can be established by us in our own relationships, and then finally revealed nationally and internationally. Now watch this principle in operation. When your relationship, let us begin it in this room, when our relationship with each other is completely free of any desire to get, have, or possess anything that the other has, when we can meet in a room like this, each one consciously aware of his union with God, so that each one knows that he can turn to the Father within for the meeting of every so-called human need, then our relationship can be absolutely pure. But the very moment that one of us looks out to another with a thought of getting or receiving or deserving or earning, even such a belief that the laborer is worthy of his hire, even that is enough to interfere with the spiritual relationship. A spiritual relationship is a giving one, a sharing one, a cooperative one, but always not for any reason. It is like giving gifts to one's children, or to husbands or wives or brothers and sisters, not for any return, not for any reason, not because they earned it or deserved it, just for the experience of expressing love. So it is that when our relationship to each other is based not on what we deserve of each other, not what we earn from each other, but what it lies within our heart to give or share with each other, and that doesn't merely mean money. Money is the least of these things. It means in all of the courtesies of life, the cooperations of life, forgiveness, understanding, mutuality, helpfulness, and so forth. Then and then only can a relationship like this be perpetuated. But now, as we go out into our family lives, the same situation develops. The very moment we do anything in our family lives, because it's either a legal obligation or a moral obligation, in that moment the material tie begins to irk. It is only when whatever we do is a pure gift of the Spirit, a pure offering of ourselves, without any sense of whether it's demanded of us, expected of us, whether it's been earned or deserved, then only is the relationship one of a pure love. The same is true in employment. There is no possibility of satisfactory employment unless the employer and the employee recognize that no human rights are involved. That it's not a question of deserving, earning. It's not a matter of what the law demands or even what moral sense demands. It means only what is the free outpouring of love. And you say that might be a difficult thing in business, but it isn't. It really isn't. It is undoubtedly in these larger industries that are controlled by unions, where you daren't even be good if it means being good where goodness is called for. In other words, no human relationship or divine may come into the relationship of most corporation and union relationships, for the simple reason that it isn't tolerated, and no experiences to show that all that is demanded is a fulfilling of the letter of the law, and when one would go beyond that, there is a suspicion, and sometimes a strike takes place, as took place in the city of New York, when one man was retiring from business, and one of his men, who had been with him 35 years, had worked his way up to being not only the assistant, but actually ran the business. When the man sold the business, he presented this man with a check for $5,000 out of the proceeds of the sale, and the help were called out on strike. The case went to court, and the court finally decided that the employer was in the wrong. He had no right to give his good employee $5,000, not unless he were willing to give it to every employee in the place. But if he weren't, then nobody could get it. Now, that's what I mean by the fact that it may be difficult in that kind of an atmosphere to let oneself go. And even then, probably ways could be found. But aside from such things, the individual is concerned mostly with the outpouring of himself or the Spirit through him. And of course, always this is the major point, without any thought of the return, without any thought of deserving, earning, being worthy of. Eventually, that will be the relationship established on earth. Because if it can be successfully experienced by the smallest group on earth, it can be experienced worldwide when the principle behind it is made evident. Now, the principle behind it is the basis, that's the word, it's the basis for our form of government. Our form of government is based on the integrity of the individual. And it is that makes this a possible relationship throughout the world, because it means that my conduct must not be based on your conduct, that it is not necessarily based on your conduct, and that your conduct need not influence mine, that I have to fulfill my own integrity regardless of what you do about yours. Now then, if I am concerned only with fulfilling my individual integrity, I have only one thing to be concerned with. And again, in this room, it is my relationship to you. If I maintain my relationship to you in accord with spiritual integrity, then I myself am fulfilling my own self and have nothing else to consider. That means then that because of the individual integrity, I will, to the highest extent of my ability, fulfill myself on that level. All right. You out here can do as you please toward me, but I must maintain myself not to fulfill what you're doing, but to fulfill my highest sense of spiritual right. But then that begins to apply in this room, because your conduct toward me is not based on my conduct toward you. You have no right to take into consideration what my conduct is. You have only to take into consideration what your sense of integrity is to yourself, so that you fulfill your own sense of integrity regardless of how much I may deserve it or not deserve it. Because any lack of integrity on my part brings about its own punishment within me. Why should you let it bring it about within you by acting in accord with my lack of integrity? Then we come to each other, and we find the same thing, that we each are acting. Now watch this, I'm not saying should. I'm saying that in this room we are. Each one in this room is acting toward the other in accord with their own highest sense of integrity, because no demands are made upon them, nothing is expected of them. So everything is flowing out in this room to each other through a free will, or a pure love that seeks no return. That can be carried out into every relationship of life. As a matter of fact, ultimately it must. And that brings us to this subject which was begun in Honolulu about a year ago, and which I stopped at that time after it was given because of the reaction that I observed. And I said then that I would not continue it until I had the solution of how to present it. And the solution, when it came, had nothing to do with how to present it, but to whom to present it. Because I found that the human world does not want it and cannot accept it, and so it must be given first to those of the more fully developed consciousness, and then gradually through them stepped down until it is possible for the world to accept it. And that subject is cosmic law. Now, there is no literature in the world on the subject of cosmic law. The reason is that those who have tried to present it have soon found that the way of wisdom was to keep quiet. The way of wisdom was to let the world hang itself rather than hang the one who tried to present it. Many of those who tried to present it were crucified. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be presented. It means that it should be presented in accord with divine wisdom. And then the Master gave it to us in being pure, but wise as the serpent. Yes, we have to be pure, but we must be wise as the serpent and careful in our unfoldment. Now, cosmic law is based on the secret of oneself. There is only one self. Self is spelt with a capital S. That self is God, the one being, the one life, the one mind, the one soul. As we look about this room, we are seeing that self infinitely expressing itself as children of God, as offspring of the One. But in just the same way that if we had a bracket here with a dozen electric light bulbs, there would only be one electricity. And each bulb would be of the same, rather the power in it would be of the same nature and quality as its substance, electricity. Electricity would be the substance, law, and activity. That would be true if there were a million bulbs. Electricity still would be the same. And it would be the same in every case. The electricity manifested or expressed in each bulb would be the same one electricity. And so the life that is expressed in this room, even by a couple of dozen people, is the one life. And the intelligence that is in this room is the one intelligence. We show forth varying degrees of it, just like the different size electric light bulbs show forth different degrees of electricity. But it's one electricity, and there's only one life in this room. And that same life is in the flowers and in the animals, vegetables, minerals, There is only one life. There's only one mind, one intelligence. There's only one soul, one spirit. So there's only one selfhood. And so it is that anything that I do is done within that selfhood, even though apparently I do it to another or for another. The Master gave us this in the 25th chapter of Matthew. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Why? Because this me, is the selfhood of every least of these brethren. The soul of every individual on earth is the soul of the Christ, the soul of God. And so whenever we do anything of a good nature to anyone, we are not doing it to them. We are doing it to ourself, since that self is my being as well as yours. And so I'm not doing it to you, I'm doing it to me, for you. But the same is true when something of an erroneous nature is done unto you. It isn't done unto you because there is no you separate and apart from me. Is there any God beside me, says Isaiah? I know not any. Oh, God is the only me. Me is the only God. God is the activity of my being. God is the soul of my being. Is there any other? I know not any. But that one is you. It is one. So in that oneness, then, is it any wonder that the Master reveals we are not to do our benevolences publicly, to be seen of men, to get credit for it? Because we're not doing it for you. We're not doing it for the other fellow. We are doing it for ourself. Why get credit then for doing something to the glory of our own self? Well, who prompts us to do our benevolences? What prompts us but the spirit of love within us? And then should we as humans take credit? No, we are setting up then a selfhood apart from that self to be glorified. Is that clear? Isn't it clear that if any one of us want credit for what we're doing, we're asking for credit for a selfhood apart from God, since God needs no credit? Now, and if we want to glorify God, we would do it anonymously and let God have the credit. But you see, it works the other way. The very moment that we do evil to another, it isn't to them, it is unto the self, myself. And it isn't necessary for the law to find it out. It isn't necessary for man to find it out in order for us to be punished. The punishment comes from the deed within ourselves, because we set up a friction by setting up a selfhood apart from that self. The moment we have thought we've done harm to another, we have set up another to do the harm to. We've set up a selfhood apart from God. Whereas, supposing we could accept this revelation of cosmic law and say, true, there is but one self, and then go out and do injury to someone knowing that we are doing it to ourselves, could it be done? No. No, it couldn't be done. Now, it is an important point for us because at this stage of our unfoldment we must understand why neither credit nor blame should attach itself to us or to another. The credit belongs to that impulse which brought forth the good deed. The discredit belongs to the ignorance of this fact, of this truth. It is only our ignorance of this truth that would permit us to do a misdeed. And so all responsibility is on this ignorance. Not that the punishment is any less because we did it ignorantly. The punishment is there and will be there, but it absolves us at least from indulging condemnation, either self-condemnation or condemnation of another. Why does the world, each time that this is offered to it, refute it and refuse it? Because it takes from the world the one tatter that it wants to hug to itself, me, a selfhood of its own. You see, it's a difficult thing to give up the credit for being spiritual or being good or being honest or being bright or being strong or being fair or being just or being benevolent. And then it takes the second tatter from us. How can we blame the other fellow for our failure if there is only one self? And you will find, if you stay in this type of work for many years, that almost everybody on the face of the globe is sure that their failure is due to somebody else. It's always somebody else's fault. It may even be the government's fault. But surely somebody else is to blame for this terrible plight in which we find ourselves. Certainly I'm not to blame for it. And yet, you see, this is what happens the moment you realize this. You have to make an adjustment within yourself and say, no one has ever injured me. No one ever has. No one ever had the power to. I did it myself. I may have done it ignorantly, not realizing what I was doing. But with this knowledge, I must know this. It was I who brought it about in my own experience and nobody else. Any blame that I place at the other fellow's feet is hiding away from the truth itself. I have created good in my life, and I have created evil in my life. I have benefited by the good, and I have suffered by the evil, but no one else has done anything unto me that I myself did not empower them to do. Now the question comes in what way is this true? Since very honestly and sincerely, most people cannot find anything in their lives that they've done to bring these things upon themselves. They cannot see where any fault is. And the reason is that the fault stems from a spiritual fault which the world knows nothing of because it is not included in the religious teachings of the world. In order to understand this properly, you must understand our spiritual interpretation of the 9th commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Now humanly, no, not humanly so much, yes, humanly, in the religious thought of the world, that means you should not gossip or spread slander about your neighbor. But as a matter of fact, that is the mildest form of bearing false witness that you can indulge. Bearing false witness means seeing your neighbor as a selfhood apart from God, since cosmic law reveals there is only one self. So every time you see an individual as a human being with qualities of their own, whether they're good qualities or bad qualities, you are bearing false witness against your neighbor, and you are bringing upon yourself all the evil in the world, because you say of this person today they are good, and then at some other time, for one reason or another, they become evil, and you were mistaken. And now you come to the belief that, oh, they are evil. Some future time they apologize or make amends, and now they are good. Well, you see, you are entertaining concepts of them. One time a bad concept, and one time a good concept, and another time a bad, and you are being punished not by them, but by your concept of them. You have the same thing in your search for God. No one is ever going to find God until they are stripped right down to the very last synonym for God and come to the acknowledgement that anything that I think of God isn't true. No matter how good it isn't true. There is no such thing as a thought about God or a concept of God that is true, because a concept remains a concept. Now then, whatever I am. But whatever you think I am is your concept of me, and you are temporarily being benefited or not benefited by that concept. If you say, oh, here is an honest man, and you let the mental barriers down, you may let him down to come into your house to steal tomorrow. Then you say, oh, but I thought he was good. Thinking had nothing to do with it. You were not acting toward him in accord with himself, but in accord with your concept of him. And so it was your concept that punished you. Now, we at this stage must acknowledge that God is neither good nor bad, because in either case we would be giving our impression of God, our view of God, our thought of God, without regard for what God actually is. How do we arrive at what God is? By first of all agreeing that nothing that we know about God is true. Nothing that we think of God is true. Not a thing. Nothing that we've read in a book about God is true. Because it all represents views of God. Even when John says God is love, you can't accept that for truth because you don't know what love is. At least you don't know what John thought love was. When the Master says God is Father, how can you accept that? Do you know what Jesus meant by the word Father? Of course you don't. So far as you are concerned, Father is a male parent, and if God isn't anything at all, you know he isn't that. If he were a male parent, he would need some help in his creation, and there'd have to be a female parent. Now you know better than that. God is neither male nor female, nor does God need any help in creation from someone else or some other sex. God is infinite being in and of itself. And so it is true to Jesus that God is Father, because the Father, or rather God, has revealed it within the consciousness of the Master, something that the Master apprehends as Father. John apprehends as love. Now, in the years of unfoldment, in my experience, one after another of these synonyms dropped away for the simple reason that there was no way for me to know what those who revealed them meant. And so I had to give up those terms, and when I came to the end of my road, I was left with the term infinite invisible. Why infinite invisible? Because infinite invisible doesn't mean anything that you or I can understand. Neither you nor I can grasp infinity. Neither you nor I can see the invisible. And so now I'm left at least with a term that denotes something that cannot be grasped by the finite mind. And I'd rather have God that than pin him down to a label of my manufacture. Now that doesn't mean that infinite invisible is the correct term for God. It only means that so far as I am concerned, it gives me a term that I cannot understand, and that satisfies me. Because if I could understand it, it would be within the range of human comprehension, and I don't want that kind of a God. With you, it will be something else. Now, in the working out of this, it brought forth another great truth. That I did not know you. I did not know man. I did not know my patients. And that was a difficult thing because I was supposed to be helping them, healing them, teaching them, saving them. And yet I didn't even know them, because what I see of you isn't you. What I see of you is body. And not even body. Again, just a concept of body. Because this one comes along and says, you are beautiful, and the other one says, I think you are very plain and ordinary. And somebody else, by their standards, may say you are very ugly. And so I'm not even seeing you as body. Again, I am entertaining in thought a concept of what I am beholding. Are you tall? Are you short? That all depends with what measuring stick you are viewing the situation. Now, that drove me back into the withinness until also I arrived through meditation and communion at the realization that the one self can only express itself in terms of its own quality, character, and nature. And therefore, what you are is what God is. What God is what you are. And so I learned that the healing principle, and this is true whether it's healing of the mind or body or purse, the healing principle is in the realization of this truth that God is in his heaven, all is well with the world. In other words, whatever God is, the offspring of God is. Whatever the infinity of God may be, constitutes the infinity of individual being. Whatever the integrity of God is, that constitutes the integrity of individual being. Can I see, hear, taste, touch, or smell God? No. Then neither can I see, hear, taste, touch, or smell you. Now we come to the wisdom. Now we come to the spiritual revelation. God isn't tangible to human sense, nor is man, the offspring of God. Man is as much a spirit, a soul, a mind, as God, for these are one. There is but the infinite one. If that selfhood then constitutes my being, everything that touches my life does so because of some concept that I entertain about God appearing as me or God appearing as you. In that way, then, I am a law unto my own experience. In that way, then, I create the good in my life, and I create the evil in my life, because the moment I deviate in my thought of you or conduct toward you, as if you were any other than the self, then am I bringing that retribution which comes from the entertaining of ignorance. Anything that we're ignorant of must ultimately bring us punishment. We must fall into error about anything of which we are ignorant. And so if we are ignorant of self, ultimately we must pay the penalty of that ignorance. So, number one, for me to believe there is a you, separate and apart from me, separate and apart from the one self, will tempt me to think something other of you than I really know about myself. Error number one. Error number two, unless I see that God constitutes individual being, I will ultimately be led through that ignorance to act in some way to you as if you were other than myself. Again, bringing a penalty upon my shoulders. If I ascribe to you any qualities, character, or characteristics which are not a part of the Godhead, I am thereby declaring a selfhood apart from God and setting up my own retribution. Now do you see why I say that the world cannot accept this? Because it is hiding behind the fact that it wants all the credit for the good that it does, and it wants to blame the other fellow for all the evil that befalls him, and that is not easily given up. You will find that when you begin to put this into practice in your own experience, you won't find it easy either. And you are further along the spiritual path than those who might hear this for the first time and be shocked out of their skin, because they can quickly tell you of how the depression broke them, and they've never recovered from it. But they're not able to tell you of how many also were broke by the depression and got over it beautifully. And they will tell you of those who were wrecked by accidents or sickness and didn't get over it and couldn't, but then we can tell them of those who were wrecked by sickness and accident and did get over it. By what? By the response within our own being. You have heard from me in class that the ultimate secret of healing work lies in the one word reaction. That is the ultimate secret. And it means this, that when you do not react to the appearances, when you have no desire within you at all to heal, change, or correct, but are perfectly willing to let all of these appearances hit up against your consciousness and be dissolved, then you will be at the top point of healing power. In other words, when you can say to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father." When you can say to cancer, consumption, and polio, "Thou couldst have no power in this world unless somebody were foolish enough to give it to you, since all the power there is in the world is in and of God." When your reaction is that, then are you doing the ultimate in healing work? But that brings us right back to the one self again. The moment you can look upon any person or circumstance and say, "You cannot be a law unto me," why? Because there is no you. There is only the one selfhood we call God, whether it looks like you out there or looks like me, whether it's male or female, whether it's Brown, Jones, Smith, or Goldsmith. It is the one selfhood, and that one selfhood contains nothing destructive to itself. Therefore, there is no destructive influence in heaven, on earth, or in hell, nor in person, place, or thing. Now, when it begins to dawn in your consciousness, well, you might study that 25th chapter of Matthew. I think it begins with verse 31. And perceive the nature of that unfoldment. I was in prison and ye comforted me, visited me. I was sick and ye comforted me. I was naked and ye clothed me. I was hungry and ye fed me. When, Lord, saw we thee and hungered and fed thee? When saw we thee naked and clothed thee? When saw we thee in prison? When saw we thee, Lord, in prison? When were you in prison, Jesus? Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me, because there is but this one me. And then you go down into that second part and see that I was sick and ye did not comfort me. I was in prison and ye did not visit me. I was an hungered and ye did not feed me. Oh, heavens, that couldn't have been. We've been sitting at your feet ever since we know you. Oh, no. Oh, no. Yes, you were sitting at the feet of Jesus, but what were you doing about Judas? Or John or James or Mary? Inasmuch as ye did it not unto the least one of these, my brethren, ye did it not unto me. Aha. There we have it. Now you begin to perceive that the good that has gone out from you has not been personal. It has been the activity of the Christ itself in action. And to set up any credit for yourself would be to set up a selfhood apart from that one. Then, as you think of, well, if nothing else, being impatient with someone or other for some reason or other, or critical or condemnatory, then you realize, well, that's what I've done. I set up a selfhood apart from God, and sometimes I called it good and sometimes I called it bad, and it was that very concept entertained in my thought that has been responsible for whatever of good or evil has taken place within me. Now you will find that it is not an easy matter to bring yourself into the fullness of thought and deed in accord with cosmic law, but then you'll also find that every tiniest violation of it will bring upon you a retribution. Cannot be avoided. You might at this moment say, I hear the question right out there, but shall we open our door to the thieves, or shall we open our door to those who are acting unlike this selfhood? Oh no, it doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that at all. Any more than we open our doors to the beasts of the field until such time as we have learned of this one selfhood so thoroughly that we can invite the lion to lie down with the lamb. Unless we are so sure of ourselves and of our understanding that God is individual being, we must not invite the lion to lie down with the lamb, because we may be doing a disservice to the lamb. And so it is that unless we are so certain of having attained the full Christ consciousness that we see only God, it isn't wise to open ourselves to the experience of those people who have not yet realized their true identity. And if you want a measuring stick as to whether or not you have achieved that, you might use the Master Christ Jesus, who at no time in his earthly experience attained that height. He at all times barred those who were not of his household. He at all times, he invited them to sit out there at the foot of the mountain perhaps, or by the seaside, and listen to him. but he didn't invite them into his household. On the contrary, as he walked up and down the Holy Lands, we find no record of his going out of his way to heal anybody unless they approached him and made themselves of his household. Oh no, he did not come to the scribes and the Pharisees. He did not go to the Roman soldiers to carry his message. Oh no, he didn't do that. He carried his message where there was some degree of receptivity to the spiritual impulse. Now, in the same way, there are all states and stages of consciousness. The Master describes them as fertile soil, barren soil, rocky soil. And he is very clear that your seeds of truth will not get very far with rocky soil. And with barren soil, it may possibly bear a little fruit for a while, but the very first wind that comes, or heat, or cold, will destroy it. And so it is that he recommends that you confine your sowing to spiritual soil, fertile soil. So it is with us. There is a world outside clamoring for what it calls peace, safety, security, harmony, but it really doesn't want it. There are thousands who come to us who do not want what we have. Not any more than the world does. The world wants, well, it wants to eat its pie and have it too. The world wants peace at somebody else's expense. It wants prosperity regardless of whose expense. It doesn't want peace, prosperity, harmony through God, because then it would want it through a universal good. Oh, no, 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 no. When it thinks in terms of its crops, it isn't thinking in terms of the nations who haven't any crops, but of how to manipulate it most profitably. And so it is when we're dealing with these other things. Now, our work must be freely given where there is the evidence that it is seeking the true peace, the true harmony. When someone calls upon me for help in this union corporation work, the very first question that is asked is, are you actually seeking a solution satisfactory to yourself, or are you sure that you will accept a solution mutually satisfactory to the other side? And in every case where I have been called upon, it was only by those few who said, certainly, you don't think that I expect you can go to God and get a selfish gain. And that is why in each case we have had a good result. They were not seeking merely a contract in accord with their own sense. They were seeking a contract that had mutual good. Well, of course, that is probably why there aren't more unions or corporations seeking this kind of help, because that isn't the kind of help they are seeking. Certainly, we know that the sick are crying out, heal us. What do they mean by that? Heal the body. Don't touch us. Don't make us give up. Oh, no, no, no. Don't do anything to disturb our baseball games and football games and television shows and whatnot. No, no, no. Don't touch any of that. Just heal the body. Take away the pain. Give us more time for pleasure. That is why this work is not Never was, even under the Master, a universal work. Everybody wants the fruit of the Spirit as long as they can have it without the Spirit. Now, it won't work with our work. We can't go into hospitals and just empty them out. We can't go into prisons and empty them out. Why? Because the people there are of a state of consciousness that brought them there. And in most cases, they don't want that state of consciousness touched or changed. But when we do go into a hospital, or when we do go into a prison, we always meet those few who are ready to have even what the world considers their nature changed. Those are the few who are receptive and responsive to this work. In no case has it ever been found possible to go out and heal masses. Multitudes, yes, but not masses. Because if we should have a meeting with 200 or 300 or 400 people gathered together, and 20 or 30 of them should have a healing, that would be the healing of multitudes. But if we could heal all of them, that would be the healing of the masses. And it hasn't ever happened, not even in the Master's day. It never will happen that the masses as such are healed, because healing means the giving up of the state of consciousness that caused the discord. There is no healing out here of the body. Medically, yes. Medically, yes. You might take one poison to remove another poison. You might cut away a piece of dead meat. Certainly, medically, there might be healing, curing, but spiritually, there never has been a metaphysical healer who could heal a body. Never has been, never will be. Metaphysical and spiritual healing involves a change of consciousness. Now, at first, that change of consciousness is within the healer. And the enlightened state of the practitioner's consciousness makes a temporary change in the consciousness of the patient. But from there on, the Master says, I forgive thee, but go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. In other words, you have achieved freedom through my state of consciousness, but now don't go back to that same state of consciousness that produced this discord, because it has even worse troubles in store for you if you do. So it is, our work actually is the transformation of consciousness. And that begins on the intellectual plane, but goes from there into the mystical. In beginning at the intellectual plane, it says this: 9/10 of all your discords and inharmonies stem from spiritual ignorance. It comes from the fact that you believe you have a life of your own, a mind of your own, a being of your own, a body of your own, whereas there is but one self, and that one is God.